Welcome to the Lifewriting podcast, where married authors and screenwriters Stephen Barnes
and Tananarive do talk about writing during stressful times, breaking into Hollywood, and balancing life.
Every week, we'll share more tips on how to build a better life while you create your dream projects.
Even if it's only at the rate of one sentence a day. Lifewriting is the application of the tools of writing to life and the tools of life to your writing. So, T, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Episode 10.
Episode 10.
Motoring along. And we have such a special guest today.
We really do.
Bryan Fuller, who is not only one of the most influential showrunners and contemporary television, but also a dear family friend.
Pushing Daisies and...
I mean, you name it. Hannibal, come on.
Star Trek, American Gods. So, and he's also a dear friend and just a hugely fun human being. I cannot wait to do that. So
the head of the Fullerverse, as they call it.
The head of the Fullerverse, that's right. So let's talk about the Do Barnes verse.
The Barnes Do verse.
The multiverse of madness.
Yes.
And you said that there was something specific that you wanted to address this time. So let's just say, we're working with our son. For me, family is the most important thing. So I asked myself, how am I doing with my wife? What am I doing to further my son? I had some specific ideas about that I shared with you earlier. I'll keep those to myself until they're a little bit more mature. Physically, I had a full workout today in the sort of B aspect of my program, which is a little less intense than the A version, but it's moving my body forward. And I have some additional insights about the combination of qigong and yoga that who knows, might get into a broadcast one day. But aside from that, it's work. So
thank you for getting me into yoga, by the way.
Yoga is the most advanced discipline that is for the maintenance of health that is available to the general public. And I've practiced and taught Tai Chi for over 40 years. So I'm not dissing Tai Chi. It's a difference between an open and a closed chain activity. And there are things that I would get into, but that's for another broadcast. I love them both. And I think that using both together is all you need to do then is work on some pulling muscles. And I think you've got everything. So great. How are you doing, sweetie?
I'm doing great, thanks to my great coach. In the boxing ring, we have what's it called, the body action system in the garage that I beat. Right. I beat the hell out of it every weekend under the tutelage of Coach Barnes, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to discover the part of myself that enjoys beating the hell out of things and boxing. So thank you.
We have survival instincts, creative instincts, sexual instincts, emotional instincts. And I think that what I saw in you is you're descended from a line of warriors. Your mom and your dad were fighting for their people, their families, but they were forced to fight indirectly. Mm-hmm. The direct confrontation wasn't going to be part of it. So your dad actually limited himself in how much direct, aggressive energy he would let out, because he could get killed. He was large and strong. It was much like my mother telling me that if I let people know too much about what it is that I am, and I'm being deliberately...
people?
Basically, okay, here's the quote that she gave us. Okay, I was trying to be nice. She said, if you let white people know how smart you are, they will kill you. My mom said that to me.
Asterisk, not all white people. Go on.
They wouldn't necessarily completely kill you. They might just cut off your arms and legs. You flop around. So trying to figure out how to navigate that territory is a very important thing. You are programmed. You're a guided missile. You were programmed to succeed. I've said to many people that you may be the best prepared human being for the life that you've chosen for yourself that I've ever encountered. You're solid.
I was very blessed with my parents.
Yes, absolutely blessed. You're what I call a potato. You're just solid. As opposed, most people like bags of potato chips. They're lucky if they're stacked up like Pringles.
Crunchy.
But one good step and the whole thing breaks. You can stand on a potato, So
I see. Okay.
But one of the things is that indirectness to, not direct confrontation. But at the same time, you have all this warrior woman energy that I saw in you. It's like you're a healthy female animal. And so that energy is natural in you. So the question I had was, well, what stopped it? And so for 23 years we've been married, I never really, engaged you with the martial arts. I wouldn't even practice around you very much.
That was your space. I'm glad that over the years you became a little less shy about at least
Yeah,
practicing.
It was shyness and feeling insecurity and stuff like that.
But aside from a little Billy Blanks and Ty Bo, for a little while there, I've never really shown much interest in that space until I had a great teacher. And oh my gosh,
showed your interest. Wow. If people see,
oh, is this what we're doing now?
Is that how it is?
Pictures? Yes. The sad thing is, I remember when I took that picture, I was not happy with the way I looked in the picture. It's like, when are we ever satisfied with the way we look? It's really, anyway, but I'm so glad that you introduced me to Don Callan, yes, your martial arts instructor, one of them.
I did the Warrior, the Warrior's Journey, available at www.realwarriorsjourney.com. But the important thing was that she was, in many ways, the greatest self-defense instructor I've ever met. And she connected the physical and the emotional, spiritual worlds together. It's all three connections. And you were her last student. You know, she was very ill. We would, every Saturday we would work through Zoom, and she would ask questions and put us through processes and evaluate techniques. And I would hold a shield for you while you practiced the physical aspects of things. And when she passed away some months back, I invited you to continue your practice using one of the tools that I had found useful, the body action system, sort of a punching dummy with arms, with pads. You began doing it kind of gingerly, as I did not want you pushing yourself too much. Then you got to the point where you could exhaust yourself. Then you got to the point where you could pace yourself so you could keep going for 40 minutes. Then by getting you to focus on your form and your breathing, and the footwork, I try to give you an assignment every time. There began to be longer and longer periods where you weren't just throwing your arms and legs or doing technique. I started noticing a little spark, because I've seen that spark in you when you write. I've seen that spark in you when you dance. I've seen that spark in you when you're thinking about doing things for your family. There's that in other contexts too that we will,
Oh my goodness!
Well, listen, forbids us from going there. But you can imagine, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, I just have to say I'm so grateful for Dawn and that short time that I had, because she was such a bridge between us. So we've talked about the difficulties of collaborating. Yes. And we're in a 23, almost 24-year marriage now. So there are very few instances where one of us can behave as if we're the coach or the teacher for the other one of us. It can be a little bit awkward. And having Dawn really sort of open that pathway so that it was very natural for me to accept you as a martial arts guru and coach. And after all these years, it's just so much fun. So thank you for that.
You're so welcome. And I'm hoping to open more fully to letting you coach me in terms of horror writing, understanding how you do what it is you do. But what I wanted to say to you, there was a line in Sex and the City where Carrie was talking about, a guy in bed, and he didn't have that throwdown, that 100% commitment. When somebody is there, it's not technique. They're there. They're not writing with technique. They're not thinking about their fingers. They're there. They're in that world. You were doing that on Saturday. I saw you working out, and for several exchanges, several moments where the coach on the video was telling you what to do, right uppercut, left hook, this, that. You were there. You were actually fighting. You were not exercising. You were not doing boxing. You were fighting. You were I could feel the lean in, the throwdown. And it's like, when you see that, that's what you want to coach. The rest of it, it's you're using, you don't want to teach somebody karate. You want to teach
That's the boxing ring.
You go.
When I hear that ring, I read that bell, I'm ready to go.
It's the same thing with the writing. You teach technique until the technique has been forgotten, and then you can bring out the emotion. It's same thing in dancing. As long as you're thinking 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, you ain't dancing yet. You're counting. That was what was that terrible movie, La La Land? You could tell that they were counting in their minds. They were not dancing. They were not flowing with it. That thing is that the flow state, the entrance into that is the doorway to all of those advanced states. And I just wanted to say, you actually touched that space on Saturday. First
Great.
time I've seen you do it, and we're going to build on that. It's going to be fantastic.
Thanks so much. So we are super excited about today's guest on the Lifewriting podcast. Bryan Fuller has created a number of television series, including Dead Like Me, Wonderfalls, Pushing Daisies, Hannibal, American Gods, worked as a writer and executive producer on the Star Trek television series Voyager, Deep Space Nine, co-creator of Star Trek Discovery. The whole reason you wanted to go into writing, Bryan, I hear, is because you wanted to write for Star Trek. So welcome, welcome, welcome to Bryan Fuller to the Lifewriting podcast. Yay.
Great,
welcome,
great.
Bryan. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, it's so much fun.
Wow.
You are the biggest kid I know, and it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
Before we get into talking about writing and your history with writing for television, I just want to tell viewers how I met you and how you came into sort of really our family fold. If I'm just keeping it real, I was taping a segment of Eli Roth's History of Horror, and I was in the green room getting made up, the makeup artist, and she was so sure to make sure I knew Bryan Fuller's in here. He was in here just before you. Those are his things right over there. Kind of like, don't miss this opportunity, girl. And I was actually too shy to say anything to you when I passed you in the hallway. I knew that it was you, and I was just like, I get tongue-tied sometimes. And you called out first, I loved horror noir, and I was an executive producer on horror noir. And then I said, I love Hannibal, and left email information in the dressing room as per that beautician's advice. And sure enough, we have been friends ever since. Several brunches.
And then Bryan invited us to watch movies at his house in the driveway on a big inflatable screen during the pandemic.
Life-saving.
And he also introduced us to people that ended up turning into a job.
Right.
And
true.
I was so incredibly grateful for both the opening of his house and the making of the introduction that I kind of said to Tenderness, how can we thank Bryan for that? So we decided, let's get him an Oculus VR set. If he doesn't have that,
too, yes,
he will love that. And then he got it. He was enjoying it. He was playing Star Wars.
Yes.
And then I realized that during the pandemic, I was prevented from seeing my daughter Nikki, which was breaking my heart because she was living down in San Diego, living by herself during the pandemic, and it was just like, oh my God, this is awful. So we started a tradition. We bought her an Oculus, and we started playing mini golf every week. And so we just kind of had the sense, Bryan's a big kid. Maybe
he likes the Oculus.
Maybe he won't think that we're too silly because we have a silly family. And so I thought, let's invite him to see whether or not he'd enjoy playing walkabout mini golf. And Bryan, you fit right in.
It's like almost like every week without fail. We're such a stereotype now. We're like doing the golf course. Yes.
So let's let Bryan start speaking for himself.
Mini golf.
How we really connected with each other, and I'm so grateful that you're here. So take it away.
Well, mini golf was life-saving during the pandemic. It was a great way to maintain community when we couldn't see each other or touch each other. And I still remember that brunch. We had a fantastic brunch in South Pasadena, and then walked past the Michael Myers house because we're all horror fans.
Yes.
And it was so nice to meet Stephen through tea, and we just sat down and we talked as writers, and also kind of openly about our sort of corners of marginalization in the community, in a way that felt like there was a very healthy fat middle to that Venn diagram where
I've been able to have some very difficult conversations with you, and God bless you for them, because I wanted someone I could speak to about that intersection of LGBTQ issues, Black issues. How do I be a good ally? How do I make myself heard? And you always heard me and never took me the wrong way. You always understood I was trying to be the best person I could be.
And same for me. I mean, I remember, when specifically talking about, working on Christine, and how the original version was very white, and there was no representation, and talking about, like, okay, you know, if this character now becomes Black, and then what are the issues around it? How can we prevent any sort of misrepresentation of that? And you were both so wonderful in guiding me as, mutual allies, to, like, this is the way to better your allyship, without stepping on landmines. And I think that's
Yes.
something that we as writers all need to help each other before it gets to the Twitterverse.
Yes.
And then there's, like, the
Holy
dog
cow.
pile. Like, if we can communicate with each other and just say, because I remember that there are times when you've reached out and said, hey, we're thinking about having a queer character in this, and what do you think about these sort of, bullet points around that character, and having an honest discourse about what feels like pandering, what feels like authentic representation, what feels like just good character work
Yes.
in general. And it's often, there's so many, it, minds in a minefield around the conversation. But, like, I think with all of us, and what I love about our friendship, is that we are storytellers first.
Yes.
And that's why we, know and love each other and enjoy spending time with each other. But we're also providing insights that we wouldn't necessarily have by ourselves. And isn't that what community is?
And you've been so great about your feedback too, in general, story, visuals, so many things that you have more experience with than we do. And Steve, you were about to say something.
No, it's just, and all this stuff fits together. You take in from the world, you let it cook inside you, you follow your bliss, your passion, you try to understand what the market is, so that there's a Venn diagram of what you want to write as opposed to what you think they want to buy. And then you write there in the center where those things enter, because you can't just write the stuff they want to buy, because that's the way to kill your soul. And you can't just write the stuff that you want to write, because that kills your bank account. There has to be something in between. And I'll tell you that one of the things that I loved the most was the first time that I realized that I was sitting there just jazzing. We were just talking ideas, and the ideas were bouncing around. I said, oh, this is his kid talking to my kid, talking to Nana Reeves' kid. This is a friendship. If we all met in elementary school or junior high school, we would have been sitting on the bleachers talking story. It doesn't
That's for
matter where we are. And that's the thing that I've noticed about mastery. When you meet a real master, it doesn't matter where you are on the path. What matters is, are you on the path or not? If you're on the path, and let's talk about it. Wow, it's great. What are you up to? What are you doing? And I'm talking about some of the world's greatest experts and things. If I had a chance to meet them, and I knew enough about their field to have an intelligent opinion and ask intelligent questions, their hearts just opened. And when I saw that with you, it was not just a matter of having fun in that sense. It was also an affirmation at a time when, frankly, I kind of needed an affirmation, because I was feeling a little beat up by Hollywood, by things that were going on there. So it's like, oh, it's okay. That I am doing the things that need to be done, and just keep taking these steps.
So Bryan, let's take a walk down memory lane. You are a young newcomer to Hollywood, trying to get your big break. What did that process look like for you? If there was any one big, like, first break, how did you land that?
Well, I was very fortunate that Michael Piller, may he rest in peace, who was a fantastic teacher and advocate for other writers, created this open submission policy at Star Trek for stories, because he knew there were so many stories that they would need to cover as kind of an episodic in nature television series, that they were never going to be not hungry for stories. So he created this open submission policy. It's how, like, writers like Ron Moore and Renee Echevarria found their ways into Star Trek and then went on to create their own shows. And so I was a Star Trek fan, and I knew in college that I could write, and it like came kind of naturally. But really, the thing that I learned most about writing were the Groundlings classes in Los Angeles. I would say any writer, if you're looking for a way.
Groundlings are an improv group, right?
Yeah, it's an improv comedy group, and it's primarily like, you know, everybody on most people on SNL springboarded off of Groundlings into onto SNL. And I remember at that time, like I got to perform shows with Molly Shannon, like in the early 90s, and Anna Gasteyer was a writing and screen partner, and Will Ferrell was dancing around in a chicken head, and like some little Hollywood, you know, it was.
What was Molly Shannon like? I love her.
The same as she is now,
which
is delightful and authentic. Yes. And like she hasn't changed from like, and she didn't remember me like in 1990 or 91 when we'd done shows at the UCB in on Franklin and in Hollywood, but you know, was the same person. Jane Lynch. There was a lot of fantastic folks there that were part of a community of storytellers that just wanted to tell stories. And the Groundlings was a great place to go and learn in a very simple way how to structure a scene. And because it's sketch oriented, it's a little more digestible than like taking on like, oh shit, I have to write an entire script about this. What was so wonderful about the Groundlings is that you're taking one scene, and often it's one scene about, you know, and sometimes a character. So it's like a monologue. And I think what is such a useful skill to anybody listening that is wanting to kind of connect with point of view and specificity, the Groundlings is a great place. Like I had fantastic teachers. Kathy Griffin was one of my teachers. Karin, oh, I'm blanking out on her name. I'm sorry, Karin, but she was amazing. Wendy Sterling, you know, these fantastic, Karen Murayama, fantastic teachers, a lot of whom were women, honestly, that taught these classes on how to structure a scene, how to be specific about character, that are all kind of foundational writing elements that I would recommend for anybody who's like feeling at an impasse with their writing or wants to take it to the next level. A, it's good to sort of think about things from an actor's point of view. And B, it's great to just think about things from a character's point of view. What is that character coming into the scene to do? And because it's laser focused on one scene, it really helps you just build all of those muscles. So I would attribute my nascent writer kind of blossoming to the Groundlings. And then when I saw that there was an open script submission policy at Star Trek, I got some Star Trek scripts, read them. I think also part of the thing with being a writer is you have to read scripts, read good scripts. Like watch the shows that you love and then read the scripts and then sort of go like, oh, this very simple kind of layout of a scene actually was taken to the next level by a director's vision, working in collaboration with the writers. Because one of the things that I love about being a writer is that we're kind of first stop with the storytellers. Everything after writing is interpretive. So we're the like we are the foundational creators of storytelling, and then everything beyond that is about interpretation of the words.
I got two questions for you. One is it more of an observation than a question? And that is, for years, I suggested that people study acting if they wanted to write. But I think improv is a higher level of that because, you know, and not only that, but I would think that improv prepares you to pitch in Hollywood. to be able to be spontaneous in the room. Can you speak to that for just a moment?
Yeah, I think one of the things that and this is sort of a rule in a lot of writers' rooms that I'm in, or heading as a showrunner, and it's the basic principle of improvisation, which is yes and so it's very easy to shit on somebody else's idea. It's very easy to cut things down. It's sort of like, no, that's stupid, it doesn't work. That's like, well, yeah, if I want somebody to have an emotional feeling, shoot a baby in the face. Nobody wants to see that. It's easy.
Right.
Like it's kind of a little lazy in a way. But what's harder and is a better skill, particularly in a community of storytelling, is the yes and principle. So Steve, if you say the first line of a story.
They walked into a room and the pumpkin had taken his head.
Yes, and the pumpkin head began to speak to the children in the room and said, "I'm going to get myself a horse." And then Tananarive would say, "Yes, and."
Go.
Oh my gosh, I'm so bad at improv. Well, actually, what I was just thinking of is I wanted to distinguish between yes and what the response would have sounded like if you were just shutting it down.
Well, it's the binary is yes and dynamics in a writer's room, and then no but. So
right.
I want to work with yes and people, and even if you don't agree with the idea or you don't think it works, yes and is a gentle way to turn the ship as opposed to jerking the wheel.
So you're focused more on what the pumpkin does more so than the fact that it's a pumpkin in that example.
Yeah, it's like
whether or not it was what the previous person had the pumpkin do was stupid.
Right. If I said, if you said, the pumpkin, he cuts off his head and puts the pumpkin on. If I said no, but the guy takes the pumpkin off and puts his head back on, then that's not really listening to the flow of the story.
We're right back where we started.
Yeah,
we have not progressed.
Yeah, it's negating the experience. And I think with even in writers' rooms where it's not a good idea, and there's a lot of that, because everybody's trying to find what the path is. If you start with a no but, then you're shutting down somebody creatively, and you may silence the next good idea that's coming out of their mouth. As opposed to saying, yes, and that's a good idea. And, if we follow that path down this road, it might not lead to the place where the character needs to go. So yes, and the character turns the wheel and steers gently off into a different direction, as opposed to no, but I mean, it's also just kind of finding a way to be respectful to other storytellers and not shit on their ideas and shut them down creatively. Because I've certainly been in rooms where a showrunner or an executive producer would say, "What's that smell?" "Oh, it's Bryan's script," type of thing. And it's just not, it's not helpful.
It's not necessary. That child part of us is the creative part, and that kid is often very, very sensitive. And
of course
you want to encourage him to come out and play. T, you were about to say something.
I was about to ask, every time I hear horror stories from you, Bryan, I get so incensed because you're such a sweet person. And I just want to beat them all up now that I have these boxing skills. But I guess my question for you is, personality wise, why do people behave like that? What are they trying to accomplish? Are they trying to show off for their writers? And if other writers do it, are they trying to show off for the showrunner? Well, what's the core of that kind of unpleasant behavior in your experience?
Well, I think there's a variety of things. I think anybody who has got a foot in the door in any fashion is probably afraid of the door slamming and pinching their foot off, in some way. So I think a lot of it is fear. A lot of it is sort of presentational kind of, posturing for, it's easier to climb up if you're climbing up onto someone else's shoulders, but that also involves putting them down.
Yeah, you can make yourself look bigger by making someone else look smaller.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of that, and I've certainly been harsh with notes in my career in a way that I'm not proud of and certainly have learned from. But I try to like bury them in some humor. And I'm also kind of, you know, very much like I'll say like that feels CW and things that feel to me like qualitative in terms of let's not go the CW route because this is not a CW show. If it's a CW show, great, then that's appropriate. If you're trying to do something else, then, you know, but in that vocalization, even as I'm saying it, it feels like you're, you know, putting down CW or putting down somebody's instinct as not necessarily being a cable show or something that's a little more thoughtful and nuanced or for a different kind of audience. And it's a tricky thing to maneuver because, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there, and I'm a very critical audience member. Like I try to keep my mouth shut about a lot of things just because in my storytelling brain, I'm always in the writer's room. And so oftentimes, and we're not always successful with it, but, you know, there are, you have to consider that there's a big audience out there and everybody likes different kinds of things. Like there are things that sort of feel to me like a little thin or brainless, but if it's starring The Rock, that's the fun of going to see a movie and with somebody that's taking you on the journey that you enjoy being with. So there's a lot of components.
I have a very brief question, then Tananarive has a more extensive one, and that is, you talked about, was it Rick Berman?
Yeah.
The open script. Why don't we see more of that in television?
Well, it was Michael Piller. Rick Berman was another producer at Star Trek.
Right, his name came up recently in another context. That's
yeah. Michael Piller is sort of like the creative guy, and really the person who changed Next Generation for the better, created Deep Space Nine, was very conscious about a lot of issues, and of course, you know, I think the pilot for Deep Space Nine is for me, it's the best Star Trek pilot. And Avery Brooks is my favorite captain, even though he was a commander in the pilot and became a captain. But I feel like it was the first time I sort of saw somebody that was three-dimensional. I think, you know, Kirk, as fantastic as Captain Kirk is, and I love Captain Kirk, and he got more sophisticated as he went along. In Inception, he was sort of, you know, this cowboy diplomat, and Picard felt like he was so shut off from his emotions and kind of representational of what it was to be a man in the 90s that he needed a woman sitting next to him to tell him how he felt about things in Counselor Troy. And it felt like Kirk and Picard were sort of stifled caricatures of masculinity from their eras. And Cisco was the first time that I felt that I was seeing a three-dimensional character. It helped that he had a son. Right. It helped that he was coming out, like we got that he was a family man. We got that he was in a loving relationship. We got that he cared about things. We got that he was tormented from trauma. And and I also think Avery Brooks is an amazing actor. But
why do you think that it is so rare to see an open call for scripts? You think
yes.
You know, that if the idea worked, how come that doorway into Hollywood isn't open everywhere?
Well, because of litigation. You know, I think eventually the door closed with Star Trek with the open submission policy, because if there was a story about the Borg Queen and you had submitted a story about the Borg Queen, the person who submitted the story about the Borg Queen would say, like, I had a story about the Borg Queen and you did an episode about the Borg Queen, like you stole my idea. And I think that's there's just like having done this for 20 some years now, I realize that, you know, great minds think alike, and there are a lot of, like, we're all consuming the same pop culture matter in a way that uh it's we're going to find ourselves having ideas inspired by the same material in a way that is sort of, not necessarily someone stealing your idea, but you having an idea similar to someone else who had a likely an idea that was very close to that, but because of the litigations and because of people not understanding that, like, we can sit in a room and talk about story and have a similar idea and go like, oh, I was just thinking that, because we are building off of the same blocks. But if you're not necessarily in the industry, exposed to other storytellers, you might not get that. Like, sitting in a writer's room, there's a lot of people coming up with similar ideas because we're all building the same story. So because it got so litigious, and there were so many lawsuits of people feeling that their stories were stolen. And certainly there were times where I submitted stories where I was like, oh, that's a lot like the story I did. But, I'm not going to say anything about it because, what's the likelihood of somebody finding your script in a pile that they've never had access to, because it's usually like a reader in a different office, on a different lot, having the same idea that you have, or it's stolen, like, and the likelihood of somebody having the same idea that you did is very high.
Yes,
that's a real shame.
That's just true.
But we could go off onto that clearly, but Tananarive, you've had something that I think is even more interesting.
Because as I said in the hallway when I first met you, I love Hannibal, and I'm not alone. Hannibal has a huge fan base that is still not over the fact that the show only lasted for 3 seasons. So I want to ask you about Hannibal, because you were able, first, sort of what attracted you to the project, what you wanted to accomplish with Hannibal, how you got away with so much in terms of those visuals on a network television show. Let's talk about Hannibal a little bit.
Hannibal, like, I remember seeing Manhunter and loving the psychological aspects of the storytelling. So I watched Manhunter, then I went to read the novel by Thomas Harris, and Red Dragon. Yep. And like, for me, I had the same experience with the Harry Potter's books. I would see the movie, then I would read the book, and it would sort of blossom and the world would get bigger. But we don't need to talk too much about those. But same thing for the Thomas Harris novels. Thomas Harris is such a specific writer and such a delicious writer, and has such elegant purple prose that just his sentence, I could reread a sentence over and over and over again because it's so masterfully constructed. And so I was in love with the style of the writing, and the delivery mechanism of his ideas was so wonderful.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean the delivery mechanism for his ideas?
The poetry, like, because essentially he's telling stories about very complex, like, he's getting you inside the head of the killer in a way that is very lurid and seductive and wet, in a way that a lot of detective murder mystery stories aren't necessary, are relatively dry, but there's something wonderfully wet and sticky about the way Thomas Harris writes, that it gets on you, it gets in you, it gets underneath your skin. And so I was on a plane, and an executive at a studio that just acquired the rights to the book Red Dragon was like, do you think there's a TV show in this? And I was like, well, yes, like, there's a great relationship to be had between Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter, as, two psychologically savvy, damaged individuals. And, it started from there. It started from wanting to tell a story about same-sex romance, almost from an ace perspective, not intentionally, but it became sort of asexual because they weren't fucking, at least, in the show. But I think if the show had gotten on, it certainly felt like it was driving that direction.
Right.
But I'm fascinated with damaged men who have a relatively narrow expression of love and fondness for fellow men. And often has to be disguised in some ways or subverted in a way that doesn't feel too homosexual, but there's still love, and it's still passionate. And it's like it's very easy to look at, say, in a show like Yellow Jackets, the power and the kind of queerness of teenage girl friendships that feel fluid and blurry. And I see that a lot with male friendships, and things like Stand By Me. There is a romance between Will Wheaton and River Phoenix that is palpable.
Yes.
And yet it's not activated, but they are tender with each other and they love each other. And I think tenderness between men is such a beautiful thing,
and rare,
and so rare. And so
I mean,
often,
I have my oldest friend, I can have a hard time just saying I love you.
Right.
And that it breaks my heart sometimes that we don't have that. But our way of saying that is to insult each other. Guys are often like that. But what about just a hug? Just letting somebody cry on your shoulder. I mean, that tenderness, the thing that you just mentioned there, I think guys crave it. And it's hard to be that vulnerable with another man.
Yeah, it's like, it is fascinating. Like, I had a friend, close friend who I love and frequent collaborator. His father died, and he was, very close to him and had so much respect for him and was shook. And at that point in our careers, I was kind of a mentor of sorts. And he needed a hug, and I hugged him and I held him. And, our necks and our cheeks touched in the embrace. And he immediately pulled away.
Yeah, he became aware of the warmth. He became aware of the closeness.
Not that it was homophobia, but it was like it became something else that, this circumstance couldn't necessarily address at that time. Right. But there was, and I was aware of it too, because like my instant thought was like, oh, that feels nice. But then I was also like, this is a straight guy who, may not necessarily be able to calibrate the intricacies of those feelings in an intimate moment where they're feeling vulnerable. But it was fascinating to me that because there was, and those are also very, erogenous zones.
It was a sensual experience. We can have sensual experiences with dogs and cats.
Right.
And I think that he became aware of the sensuality of the moment. Right. And sensuality and sexuality are very close together. And so that then led to an aversive response. Because
I mean, I make out with my dog all the time. Like, it's like,
I was gonna say, I want to hear more about Steve's sensual moments with my cat, but we'll get on to that at another point.
Cat Bryan, or cat metaphors.
Oh, hello. So Bryan, in terms of the way you were able to create those stunning visuals, I mean, there's a lot to remember about Hannibal. Absolutely, that relationship and that dance is one of the central things people remember and talk about, but also those striking visuals, the combination of beauty and horror, somehow packaged for a network. Is that something you're proud of in terms of how you were able to pull that off even, and how did you do it?
It's something I was very proud of. It's something that was almost for me a necessary crutch to transcend a lot of the trappings of traditional television procedurals. Like which I don't really respond to because I sort of see the math of them, you know, and like I remember watching an episode of House and the teaser was a guy, like the guy was peeing and I was like, if he has blood in his pee and that's the act out, I'm shutting this off. And he had blood in his pee and that was the act out. And I was like, you gotta work harder to entertain me. So I was resistant to a lot of the trappings of procedurals because the math of it is very obvious to me. I'm like, okay, this is where it's going. I start to feel the cadence because I've seen so much and consumed so much story. I want to be surprised. And so initially, at least, the visuals were a way to entertain me, if that makes sense. You know, I had to like kind of take it into a place where I was getting something out of the procedural. I had to like gravy the you know, at times dry meat of a crime procedural with a lot of gravy, and that was my gravy. That was my frosting. And you know, how we got away with it. I remember the conversations very early on with David Slade, who directed the pilot, and he was like, I want the visuals to be ugly and challenging. It's death. I'm not going to glorify death. And I was like, well, yes, we are. You know, so like, you know, that may not be your agenda, but that's exactly where we're headed. So buckle up, Buttercup. We're going a different direction.
You know, are you glorifying death, or are you showing that? Are you delivering some real horror, which is we begin to understand the world from Hannibal's perspective? That's exactly real horror. And exactly. So it has to be beautiful. He has to take chaos or ugliness and transform it into something beautiful. That allows you to show the abstract way that he looks at human beings. You know, they're potential art materials, you know?
Yeah, well, and I think that's becomes the danger of it, because for me, what I loved about Red Dragon is we got inside Francis Dollarhide's head in a way that created great empathy, and like it was, and I felt that was the beauty of what Thomas Harris was doing, is that he was giving you the tools to forgive and understand someone who's doing horrific things. And that felt really complex. And
well, look at his seduction of the blind woman at the photo place. He takes her to a pet doctor. You know, what do they call it? A veterinarian who is treating a tiger at a zoo, and the tiger has been anesthetized, and he is encouraging her to feel the heat and the breathing and the purring and the heartbeat of the tiger. You know, you can see that he is wondering, could you handle the heat of a relationship with a predator? I'm a predator. Right. And of course, she responded sexually. So it was a successful seduction. So that was an amazing visual metaphor.
And it's genius. And it sort of takes what was happening with, you know, Eric Stoltz and Laura Dern and Mask with, like, you know, flavors of ice cream to represent colors, and sexualized it in a way. It was this fantastic evolution of how do you, you know, and we were talking about this the other day about, you know, Geordie LaForge and, you know, being blind, and yet people asking the questions, well, how can he be attracted to a woman if they can't see them? And it's brother. Is your experience so narrow, like, and so insular to who you are, like who you are, that you can't think outside of those restrictions? And that says so much about, you know, anybody who can't empathize and put themselves in the shoes of someone who doesn't look like them, or doesn't think like them, or doesn't feel like them. And that's, you know, going back to how this conversation started, is, you know, one of the things that I love about our relationship is that we can talk openly about where we are not necessarily afraid, but aware of our own limitations, and working with each other as a community of storytellers to reach beyond those limitations.
Wow, that's fantastic. And I'm glad you feel that way, because we certainly do feel that way back. And Bryan, not to get too much into the weeds with specifics about things that you don't want to talk about, but I've heard a few horror stories from you. And it's interesting, that you both have the courage to basically say, okay, I'm done, and walk away from things if they're not working sometimes, but also to stick it out when things aren't what you want. And one thing we talk about in this podcast is the kind of coping mechanisms writers need, all writers, whether you're trying to work in the minefields of Hollywood or just deal with the rejection of your poor story being rejected yet again. How do you do that? How do you navigate this very difficult terrain and stay centered and balanced and in touch with that inner child who produces your greatest vision?
Well, I think tenacity is a skill that we all have to develop, and also community, because I think, it's necessary. If you feel alone and you're not seeking support, it's very dangerous. It's very dangerous in terms of our psyches, and especially if you're waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning and you're conscious, but your rational brain is still asleep. And that's when we get all of the bad thoughts, all of the suicidal iterations, all of those things that are detrimental to our child. And that's sort of like writing in a vacuum, is waking up in the middle of the night and your rational self is still asleep. So in having community and
Bryan, that is one of the smartest things I have ever heard anybody say about the artistic life. You're talking about waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning and your emotions are awake, but your intellect is asleep. Holy crap. Would you do us the extreme gift of being specific, either about your own life or someone that you knew? I'm not asking to get into, into the meat of what you're talking about, but I think that some specificity there would be fantastic. If you can think of a time that somebody told you they woke up, they had this panic attack or something, just if you could be specific, it would be great, because that's brilliant.
I think as storytellers who are always taking swings and trying to, as Sid Croft says, turn left when everybody else turns right. And I think anybody who's telling stories from a marginalized place, we're used to, we want to turn left because that's where we live. So, but that makes it harder for us to sell a story or be more mainstream, or even when you write a script and it's like one of the best things that you've ever written, and yet there's challenges, whether it's corporate politics or the limitations of an executive's imagination or a studio system. There are times when I know that I've woke up in the middle of the night at 3 o'clock in the morning, at 4 o'clock in the morning. My rational brain is asleep, my emotional brain is awake, and all I'm feeling is, this like, is this the right industry for me? Is this the right place for me? Am I just not suited for this industry because I don't know how to tell stories mainstream as well as I do, a little off center, or a little like.
It's so critical for people to hear someone at your level of success and accomplishment, which is 99.999% of the people who hear this are not where you are. So for them to know
that Candor,
that's successful, and the same, it's like I had the extraordinary honor of being at the deathbed of one of the great writers of the 20th century, and he was asking the same questions about, did anything I do matter? Will I be remembered? Was this appropriate for me? You're talking about the universal feeling that you don't fit. That's existential stuff.
Yeah.
And it is separate from the question of the level of success or the occupation that you're in. That's great.
And Bryan, what do you say to yourself, or are there specific steps you take when you're in that place to move through it or beyond it?
certainly it's like I try to tell myself that part of my brain is asleep, and the part that will save me will wake up eventually, and just wait for it to wake up. And there have been, like, it varies. Like, there's certainly been times where the rational side is, and that's why, like, don't fucking listen to your brain at 3 o'clock in the morning. It is a fucking liar. It is the devil. Like, it is, and not the good kind of devil, like, because I think there's a good kind of devil, but it's the worst. Like, it's the worst part of ourselves, that it's all of the negative feedback. It's all of the negative voices who are now, like, uncorralled, and the barn has burned down, and the negativity is running rampant, and it feels so overwhelming in those moments. And certainly I've tried anti-anxiety, antidepressants, and things like that. Usually I can rationalize with the thought of, like, hang on until the rational side wakes up. Hang on until there's reason returns to the conversation, because we are vulnerable in those moments that reason has left the building. But unlike Elvis, it will come back. Like, it will. Like, Bryan, if we can just,
as you well know, we could talk about this all day long. And we hope that we'll be able to have you back.
Yes, please, please.
Because you just opened a door into the kind of conversation that takes real courage to even step there, man. That's great.
No, it's good. And all those listeners out there who do get those voices at 3 a.m. And mine is usually like at about midnight when I'm trying to go to sleep the first time. So it prevents a lot of easy sleep.
This is the truth. What you just said with Bryan, that insecurity that the person who's never sold a single story feels. Do you notice? Here's a man at the top of his game, same insecurities, learning how to deal with our emotions, our real emotions, our friend, and then harness them with our intellects, the part of us that knows how to do the thing. This is the critical thing. You don't want to disown those negative emotions. That's what powers you. So what Tananarive and I have always done, not only just try to have conversations like these with Bryan, but in the creation of the Lifewriting Premium program, it's like, what are the tools that we have used that enabled us to survive, to keep going, to still be in love with the craft after writing and publishing millions of words? Team, take this away a little bit, because I can.
Well, really, I love what Bryan said earlier, which is persistence in terms of, and sometimes you need a little extra help creating that sense of persistence, because life gets in the way. I mean, we're still in a pandemic. Steve and I are homeschooling. You in the listening audience have all kinds of things in your world that are interrupting your dream, or that you're allowing to interrupt your dream. So the Lifewriting Premium program has weekly modules that can serve as another one of those voices in your head. And that voice is keep trying, keep going. And this week, here's a new lesson to help you stay on that path.
If you can commit to writing one sentence a day, if you can get the leverage to get yourself to write one sentence a day, we can get you there, because that's the first thing. Writers write. And even if it's just one sentence a day, you're keeping that creative space open. That is all we need. We'll induce the rest of it from you. You're a writer. You're of our tribe. You're on the same path, and we love you for it. So if you'll go to www.lifewritingpremium.com, you'll be able to see what this course is and what it is that we have for you. We would love for you to be part of that community. Bryan, you're a gem, as always.
Yeah, this will be part one. We'll have to bring you back, like when you're promoting something, or just to chat. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Website, Bryan, that people can get, can learn more about you.
I think if anybody wants, like, there's a Living Dead Guy website that has all the scripts from the different shows. I think it still works. I haven't checked it in a while. But it's a good resource if you're writing, and if you want to watch a show and read a script and watch a show, it's a very important muscle to build up to tell your own stories.
Absolutely.
That is great. And even if you can't find the website, you know, absolutely, that is golden advice. That's the same advice Steve and I teach with screenwriting. Read scripts, watch the shows.
Every Saturday night, watch a movie, read the script. Just
absolutely.
in a year, you'll know more than most people went to MFA programs.
Exactly.
You know? So listen, guys, it's been wonderful. And, you know, we can't wait to see you again. Why don't you do the outro, T? Just take them home.
Well, I'm just so excited that Bryan was able to come. I'm so excited for all the listeners who were here this week to hear this conversation. All of you, just go out, write a sentence a day at least, make yourself the hero or heroine of your own story. And thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Let's try to get my applause to go. There it is. Yay, thank you so much. Yay. That's the end of the show, everybody. Love it. Thank you so much, Bryan.
That was great. Stop the recording here.